While The Forest at its core is a survival horror game that drops you in a mix of an island coupled with the constant threats of the wilderness and cannibalistic natives, the game also has an in-depth story that consists of various Easter eggs, items that can be found around the map, and that eventually start to give you a clue of where to find items and parts for the pistol in the game. After visiting these various places, you are finally led to unlock a new area of the map, along with the story mission and the final boss battle. The ending to the Forest story gives an interesting moral dilemma and a cliffhanger, and once completed, unlocks the creative mode for the game. When you begin the game, you are flying on a commercial aircraft with your son. Soon after, a mysterious shockwave hits the plane and the crash ensues, followed by you waking up to find a primitive looking person covered in red, holding your unconscious son right before you until you again briefly lose consciousness. You slowly wake up and find that your son is now gone and you are the lone survivor. After gaining your bearings and learning the basic mechanics of the game, you may find yourself viewing the to-do list in the survival book, with the first of the tasks being to find Timmy. This instruction, however vague, gives you at least a simple mission to do in an otherwise completely survival-based game. During your time on the island, you will no doubt take notice of the natives, the cannibalistic inhabitants of the island, that will at first take little interest in your going-ons about the island. However, as days go by, they'll become more violent and begin to appear in larger groups, with even more hideous ornaments attached to their bodies. After these attacks, you may be captured and taken to one of the caves, and this is where the story begins to reveal itself in very fractured pieces. Once escaping these caves, the player may wish to go back later to find items or story loot hidden through the vast caverns of the island. The story of the game is entirely optional, and it is up to the player at this point if they wish to continue any further. If you continue to delve deeper into the story, then the journey begins with exploring the various locations around the island's surface to begin with. This results in the discovery of minor story items that may or may not make sense on how they are connected as of yet. All, if not most, of the items can be viewed in the Survival Guide's Notes section, which are placed in chronological order in reference to the main story. The story's location is set somewhere around the North American region. This can be deducted by the climate and the weather conditions on the island, as well as the animals and plant life that inhabit it. The island contains a variety of environments, such as lakes, ocean sides, dense forests, hills, mountains, caves, caverns, and so on. When exploring these caves, you might find a number of missionaries, assumed to be Christians, that had died presumably as the result of cave-ins. Once extensively exploring caverns and cave systems, you will come across a large set of obsidian doors. They appear quite old, indicated by their rustic appearance. They seem to suggest an ancient group had built these structures. The doors are quite Lovecraftian in design and require a simple sacrifice of items to open the door. Another structure that has this design is the obelisk. The obelisk is located in the far reaches of the island and is a massive structure that has technologies that made humanity's achievements look like participation medals at a science fair. The obelisk itself seems like a base or building, as the internal structure has pathways and other technologies that can be accessed within it. Again, these technologies have a distinct Lovecraftian feel and can be accessed within. They suggest that they were built a long time ago by a now long gone advanced civilization. The obelisk contains a technology that also requires a sacrifice to operate, which seems to be a reoccurring theme with this form of technology. Whoever built these ancient structures obviously were very advanced and had a very spiritual background, believing in sacrifices being the main way to operate their technology, integrating their beliefs into their technology's inner workings. We are not sure who these ancients were, a previous group of humans, another species from Earth, or an alien race. The obelisk can also mutate and create horrific creatures from people. The cannibals on the island, however, are not mutated. There are two main groups of inhabitants. There are the human cannibals and the mutants of the island. The cannibals use paint to disguise themselves as mutants, which appears to be an effective strategy, because you will never see the two factions fighting unless provoked. Mutants are a result of the obelisk's mutagenic powers. These mutants presumably created by the technology known as the resurrection obelisk, a device within the confines of the obelisk structure that can save or bring back to life someone that has recently died by the sacrifice of another. The mutants as the basic The mutants such as the Armsy, the Virginians, the Mutant Babies, Crowman, and Megan Cross are just some of the mutants that are located across the island and are a result of the obelisk's awesome power. Some of the mutants are located in places that the missionaries went to explore, and as the missionaries were believed to be the first human inhabitants on the island, it goes to suggest that these mutants, like the ancient structures, predate human occupation and the cannibals here on the island. There are a number of sketches and papers written in Latin that account and hint to these facts. The last mention of these ancients, for the time being, is that their obelisk also contained a weapon, or as far as we can assume, it is a weapon. This weapon will become more relevant later on in the story. So as far as we are aware, the earliest history of the island included the existence of an ancient, highly advanced race of beings that believed in sacrificial offerings, as their technology is based around it, with this technology having extraordinary and horrific abilities. The missionaries arrived on the island around the early 1800s. These missionaries brought with them a number of priests and noblemen. During their stay, they wrote many papers on their experience of the peninsula. Latin papers and Virginian sketches can be found around the island, and are just some of the records which can be found within Cave 1, along with a supply of dynamite sticks. From the Latin language used, we can deduct that these missionaries were Roman Catholics. So we know at this point, at least, there was already mutants on the island, because there is no evidence to suggest that the missionaries made it as far into the island as the obelisk. We can rule out that these mutants came from the missionaries, and do in fact predate them. Even the baby mutants were mentioned within the missionaries' papers, and a head-on encounter with the Virginians caused many to lose it and start drawing vivid sketches of them. The furthest exploration evidence we have found of the missionaries is in a deep cave system where lays grey tents, Bibles, crosses scattered over the ground, and a mass of mummified corpses in pose praying to a drawing of the obelisk. The means of their death is unknown, and the fact that they appear almost frozen in time of their death, praying to an object they never even saw, makes it even more mysterious. Most likely something happened almost instantly, killing them and mummifying their bodies in place. Whether there were any missionaries left on the island after these events is not certain. However, the timeline of the cannibals' appearance on the island is still unknown, and it is quite possible that the missionaries left behind were either eaten by the mutants or joined and started to live alongside them as cannibals, adapting to this new way of life. Around the 19th and early 20th century, Sahara Therapeutics purchased the entire island and took ownership of the obelisk and artifacts located there. What is not known is how they knew about the ancient structures and devices. It is assumed that they knew about them before purchasing the peninsula, and it is possible that word of the missionaries' discoveries made it back to the church, and where it was recorded for some time in their history, and eventually the information was found some way by Sahara. Nevertheless, they purchased the peninsula and began studying the obelisk and its artifacts. they set up a research facility within the obelisk and began their studies. The main reason Sahara Therapeutics purchased the peninsula was to conduct experiments on eternal life and resurrection through the obelisk. They built a complex system of offices and research labs within the obelisk structure itself, reaching as high as the mountains to deep below the ground in the caves. After much time learning and discovering the secrets of the island and the ancient technologies, the Archivist project, headed by Sahara Therapeutics, decided to test the obelisk's power in an attempt to heal a sick and terminally ill child. It is known that the project gained both volunteer children as well as kidnapping them, as newspaper clippings and milk cartons around the island told of missing children and siblings. It is most likely they became test subjects and were initially successful. First of all, they discovered that for the revival or the resurrection of a child, a sacrifice of another would be required. The obelisk would hold one subject within them and somehow mysteriously transfer their life essence into the deceased child. The second and biggest snag that the project hit was that each and every time the child was revived, they would eventually, within an unspecified amount of time, mutate and spawn a horrific mutated creature, similar to the ones found on the island by the previous explorers. The sacrifice child problem also set up a cycle that would see child after child being used to revive the previous, with no way of making the cycle end. After the procedure, the child would be observed in special rooms to watch as they began to deform and mutate. These new creatures would be sampled and have genetic material removed and analysed in order to determine any medical, weaponry or bioengineering purposes, mostly in the fields of cloning and preserving the human body past its usual lifespan. For an unknown duration of time, Dr. Matthew Cross joined the Archivist project for Sahara Therapeutics and headed all aspects of the project scientific-wise. He worked with the original team to unlock the powers of the obelisk held within, and a number of strange and bizarre creations were forged from these experiments with the obelisk. Cross also studied the second artifact and discovered that it was a form of weaponry. The device is able to take down aircraft within the area of the island. At some point during the project, Dr. Matthew Cross brought his young daughter Megan to the facility. His daughter, for some unknown reason, was eventually subjected to the effects of the obelisk, or the research obtained from the mutants. She may have been suffering from a disease that Cross wished for her to be cured of. Nevertheless, it resulted in her needing a wheelchair to get around. As their tests progressed, they were able to recreate the creatures found previously on the island, such as the Armsies and the Virginians. One day, Megan and a group of scientists are in the cafeteria of the facility when there is a containment breach in the mutants' holding cell. It is an Armsie, and in the chaos of other mutants escaping, Megan is attacked and killed. The creatures either escape or are subdued, and for a brief period of time, peace returns to the project's operations. Overcome with grief, Cross begins to perform inappropriate and unsanctioned use of the company's equipment, such as the obelisk, being enlarged to focus on his endeavours of reviving Megan. Cross believed that if he could learn more about the obelisk, he could bring his daughter back to life without horribly mutating her. His meddling is discovered, though, by others of his team, and he is subsequently fired. Cross escapes the facility and evades capture, and spends a certain amount of time on the peninsula alone, and learns how to hide himself from the other mutants by painting himself with red paint. For some reason, this deterred the mutants and the cannibals alike from attacking him. During the years before the project's arrival, and even after their arrival, there is a number of other people who found their way to the island, whose origins are somewhat of a mystery. Besides the early missionaries, More modern people explored the island. Cave divers and climbers were once exploring the island, most likely unaware of the dangers until it was too late. Many hikers and explorers established camps all throughout the island, with every single one being abandoned, most likely due to mutant or cannibal attacks. Those that did not die or get eaten most likely joined the cannibals by donning the paint and allowing them to live side by side with the other natives of the island. There is also evidence of a film crew being present on the island at one point, filming a Survivor-like TV series. However, their fate is much the same as the others. There is also a yacht that is crashed on a reef at the far end of the island, and aboard holds a number of clues indicating that the yacht may have been parents or guardians attempting to locate their children, as there is both newspapers and milk cartons aboard the vessel that show missing children media titles. It is possible that their child was taken by the Jairus project, and that they had gotten information about where they were and followed the lead only to reach the island full of deadly threats, which quickly extinguished their pursuit of the child. The yacht seemed to have arrived in and around the 1980s or 90s, as evidenced by the dates on the magazines of the boat. Matthew Cross eventually encountered this vessel and used it as a temporary shelter as he schemed a plan to resurrect his daughter. One thing that Cross noticed was that every couple of days a plane would fly overhead, realizing that it was a common flight path for a specific aircraft. Cross realized that he could take the plane down using the weaponry artifact in the facility. There may be a child survivor aboard, and he could use this child in a sacrifice to the obelisk to bring Megan back. The only problem is that the facility would not be easy to infiltrate. He makes his way back there and discovers that in his absence, the place had suffered some sort of attack by either the mutants escaping again or through an attack from the creatures outside the facility. Wasting no time, Cross recovered Megan's body from the facility's morgue and took her to the obelisk room, hooking her up to the machine that had been used to direct the obelisk's power into test subjects. After this, Cross moved to the second artifact room, where he began waiting for the arrival of the next airplane. Eventually, he viewed a plane headed close by and used the project's computer terminal to successfully charge and fire the weapon at the plane. This caused significant damage and it crash landed towards the center of the island. He quickly headed off to the crash. Once he arrived, he finds a many number of survivors, and he searches and searches for a young child. When he can't find one, he is filled with anger and rage. He begins to mercilessly kill the remaining survivors, driving an axe he finds straight through every living person he saw. And then, like a gift from the heavens, he spotted it. A young boy lying next to a grown man. He quickly grabbed the body, ensuring that he was still alive. He was, and he goes to walk out with the boy. He had finally got what he needed to bring back his daughter. He noticed that what he presumed to be the father was still alive and grasping for his son. Now calmed down, Cross decided to spare him and leave to return to the facility. And here we begin the events of the game's opening sequence. Matthew Cross is the man that we get to see through the point of view of the main protagonist, stealing our son Timmy at the beginning of the game. Once returning to the lab, Cross put Timmy into the device, causing the structure to kill the boy and give life to Megan. Cross is relieved and instantly embraces Megan. He gives her crayons and paper as she wishes to draw after their reunion, to which he does, and once he does, Megan begins to draw terrifying images of creatures and structures he has never seen before. This begins to cause great concern for Cross. He brings up the drawings with Megan, and she refuses to tell him of their origin. He warns her that if she did not tell him, then he would take her crayons away until she did. However, this became a mistake for Cross, as the anger experienced by Megan appeared to continue to grow until it took a physical appearance. Her body began to contort and become misshapen. She killed Cross with the very crayons he had just threatened to take from her, stabbing them into his body multiple times. Megan, possessed or broken by the obelisk's effects, returned to semi-human form for the most part after this seemingly unaffected her actions, as she continued to draw the horrors from within her mind. She remains within the facility for the time being. Back at the plane crash, the protagonist player of the game, named Eric, quickly is able to build a shelter as he's in possession of an outdoor survival guidebook, and it is evident that he has a history with survival skills and techniques. He quickly learns, however, in his pursuits that he is not alone on the island, and as he begins to encounter the horrific mutants and the ravenous cannibal inhabitants of the peninsula. It is also realised through a magazine that Eric is a TV survival reality star, something akin to Bear Grylls. As Eric searches for his son across the island, he encounters many abandoned camps for previous explorers. He finds a cave system used by the missionaries, and through his ventures, Eric gains information about what the island is and where the mutants came from, and where his son could be. Eventually, Eric will come to learn most of the lore of the island through tape recordings, photographs, books, letters, newspapers, magazines, etc. Eric hoped that he would find other survivors of the crash, as the back section of the plane had been relatively left intact. However, not one presented themselves. Not one. They either fled the island, were killed by Cross, taken and eaten by the cannibals or mutants, or the last possibility is that they too discovered the red paint camouflage technique and had now immersed themselves within the cannibals group. After extensive exploration, building a large and fortified shelter, and arming himself with a number of weapons, Eric decides to head to the research facility in search of Timmy. Eric traverses an array of cave systems to find the bottom of a sinkhole, where a large ancient door could be opened using a personal belonging sacrifice. Once through, Eric finds himself at the facility's vault door, which he uses a keycard that can be discovered earlier in the game to unlock it. This gives him clearance to the research laboratory. Once inside, Eric contacts a many number of horrific mutants, of all shapes and sizes. One even envelops an entire room, expanding like a tumorous growth throughout the entirety of the facility. Eric eventually discovers the obelisk, and he is able to open the device, revealing a dead Timmy within. Overcome with grief, Eric collapses to the floor, with his son in his arms. But at that moment he remembers what this device is. He had learned it through his discoveries of Cross's notes, and that it could be used to resurrect a child at the expense of another. And then he realised why Timmy had been stolen in the first place, in order to revive some other child, most likely Cross's child. And now that he knew that she should be around the facility somewhere, Eric hooks Timmy into the machine's receiving end and leaves to find Megan. Eric eventually discovers Cross's body with crayons shoved through his eyes and mouth. Eric struggles to understand how the child could overcome an adult and inflict this much damage, if it was in fact Megan that did this. After a short search of the area, Eric finds Megan at the end of a long room. Eric approaches slowly as he views the many toys and drawings Megan has surrounded herself with, and as he gradually approaches, Megan can be seen holding and playing with the toy plane. As she flies it around, she eventually shoves it to the ground and points at Eric, giving the impression that she knows about the plane crash and how he came to be stranded on the island. After this strange gesture, Megan freezes, before suddenly going into a violent convulsion on the floor. However, it doesn't end there. Megan begins to experience a growth from within her mouth. Eventually, an array of strange, contorted limbs emerge, and a desperate fight ensues, with Eric having to attack and kill the creature Megan had become. Eventually, with great difficulty, Eric is able to kill Megan, and the mutated features disappear and leave behind the dead body of the young girl. Taking her back to the obelisk room, Eric places her within the machine, only to find that a live sacrifice is required to resurrect Timmy. With this information, Eric was left with only one choice to obtain a live child. With the knowledge that the second artifact had the ability to take down a plane, he decided he would do so in order to procure a child sacrifice for his son. Once at the terminal, Eric has a choice. He can let the next passing plane fly by and escape the island with his life, leaving behind all that he had lost, or he could take down a plane and use another's child to resurrect his own, leaving with both of their lives. It is all the player's choice at this point, and if Eric chooses to spare the aircraft, then he escapes the facility, leaving Timmy behind, and afterwards burns a photo he has of him. Eric will then accept to make his way off the island or await rescue. However, in the event that Eric does take down the plane, Eric is able to successfully procure a child. He uses them in the obelisk, and his son and himself eventually, over the course of a year, make it back to civilization. The two are seen as amazing survivalists for both enduring the plane crash, surviving on the island, and making it back to civilization. Their stardom even lands them a spot on a hosted talk show where Eric talks about his time on the island in a fictional representation of the events, while his son watches blankly, obviously having no memories of any of the events his father is talking about. Just as Eric is about to go on a wood chopping contest with the host as a fun gag, he looks over to see Timmy has fallen from his seat and started to tremble. The condition worsens and Timmy begins to experience a seizure, much like that of the one that Megan did. Eric rushes to his son, attempting to comfort him, whilst being fearful of what may be about to happen to his son. To his shock, Timmy's spasms halt, as Timmy looks up to his father with a reassuring smile that he is okay. The last lore piece we have seen through Timmy's eyes is when he is now a young adult living in an apartment, seemingly by himself. He leaves his shower and brushes his teeth, and then moves into his bedroom. And it is here we see the result of his life. He had become obsessed with the island, searching for history, learning of the company Sahara Therapeutics and the Archivist project. Timmy turns to view a pinboard that holds many images and notes, and also at its center a map of an unknown island, appearing not to be the one from the main story, evidenced by the title stating this is Site 2. Just as we see this, however, Timmy once again experiences a violent tremor, with a bulging growth protruding from various parts of his arm at random times. This bulge eventually dissipates, however, whilst the tremors continue, as Timmy leans against his room window overlooking a dark, rainy city. And that's basically it for the lore of the forest. If I have missed anything out, I am sorry. I tried to get as much of the lore into this video as possible. The ending of the forest heavily sets up the second installment, and there have been rumours of a Forest 2 or something along the lines where this Site 2 seen on the map is explored. But if you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comment section. If you want to stay up to date, please subscribe and hit the notifications button to keep you informed of when I upload. And that's basically it, guys. So I hope you guys did enjoy the video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.